Hi, folks. I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to class, and I hope you had a great weekend. This is our second week of class, and I'm excited to start us off by talking about the relationship between performance and language and how performance both thinks about the limitations of language and how we might think about exceeding those limitations or think about performance as a way to create certain effects or to communicate things beyond what we can through simply speaking our normal type of communicative language. So that is our focus today. Before we get started, I wanted to start off just with a couple of the usual logistical things. So I wanted to first of all say congratulations on finishing your first performances. Thank you for everybody for submitting them in a pretty timely manner. Again, I'm sorry that I misspoke about Thursday versus Friday, but I appreciate all of you or most of you turning in your performances in time so that your peers could have the opportunity to review them. I will be providing you two types of feedback for your performances by Thursday. I'll be posting a video lecture like this one where I just give a rundown of the main constructive and the main positive things I saw from each performance, or not from each performance, but from your performances collectively. So I'll try to give you recommendations then of things that I saw people doing really well that you might want to consider incorporating into your own performances, or you might want to think about moving forward from here. And I might make some criticisms of, or constructive criticisms in the way that we have been talking about it, of things that people could be working on, things that it seems like as a class we might be struggling with a little bit, and hopefully provide some helpful suggestions about how to work on those problems. So that's the first part, and on Thursday I'll have that video posted. By Friday, I will have written feedback returned to you on your first performances for you to review, and that'll be your actual grade and personalized responses. So keep an eye out for both of those. The only other logistical thing that I wanted to talk about today is just a friendly reminder that your forums posts were meant to be turned in by the time that you watch this lecture today, theoretically, if you're watching it at 3 p.m. today. So I hope that you posted a forum and an FAQ post as I asked you to. And if you have any questions about any of this, please remember that I posted handouts under assignment prompts on Sakai for both how you should think about responding to or writing your own forums posts and then writing responses to your peers' forums posts. And then also there is a separate handout about writing peer feedback on your performances. And remember that that will be due on Thursday for you. It's a week away from the first performance, so I'll be asking that you return feedback to your peers on Thursday. And again, you're supposed to select two peers from the course to write about or to respond to, and you're supposed to suggest things that you thought were really effective about their performances and things that you think that could be worked on or possibilities for improvement or things that they might want to think about. But again, all of that's broken down to the handout. So just a reminder that that's due on Thursday. So just keep a lookout and keep up with the syllabus because all of your due dates for all of your assignments are on our schedule. So if you ever get confused about when something is due, you can always check there. Okay, awesome. So that's all of my logistical stuff. So today I want us to start off with some warm-up activities because this day in particular is a day in which we're going to be thinking about the body and we're going to be thinking about what is beyond language. So starting out by centering our bodies and feeling our bodies is going to be really important. So I want to start us off then with the breathing exercise that we've been doing to begin class most days. That is the box breathing, or at least that's what I've been taught to call it. So that is, again, from our first day. I sort of ran us through this, but we're going to breathe in for 1 beat. We're going to hold it for 1 beat. We're going to breathe out for 1 beat, and we're going to hold the exhalation for 1 beat. And then we're going to count up to 2 and hold for 2 and count, and then breathe out for 2 and then hold for 2, up to 5, and then we're going to work back down to 1. So that's going to be our first warm-up activity today, just the breathing that we've done before. But I want us to do something just a little bit different in terms of this breathing exercise, which is I want you to really focus on how you're feeling while you do the breathing. And that could be physical things like how does the air feel? Is it clean or is it gritty from the dust storm that's been blowing through town? Is it easy for you to breathe, or is your breathing a little bit tight or labored because perhaps you're anxious or because you're dehydrated or something? Think about emotions you might be having if they pass through your mind, or think about the way in which you might be hungry or you might be distracted. All of those things. Let yourself feel what you're feeling as we move through these exercises, and think about what those different kinds of feelings are. What are thoughts? What is in your body? And what might you consider to be an emotion? And how do those things feel when you're going through this activity? So try to think about those things. Of course, it might be difficult while you're focusing on the breathing exercise. The point is just to be present in the moment. Listen to the thoughts that pass through your mind. Listen to the feelings that pass through your body. So I'm going to count us through this because I can't really do the breathing and the counting at the same time, but I'll do my best. So I'm going to use fingers, and we're just going to do the breathing exercise together. All right? All right, so let's get started. Breathe in for 1. Hold for 1. Breathe out for 1. Hold for 1. Breathe in for 2. Hold for 2. Breathe out for 2. Hold for 2. Breathe in for 3. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. 4. Breathe in for 5. Hold for 5. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Hold for 4. Breathe in for 3. Hold for 3. Breathe in for 2. Hold for 2. Breathe in for 1. Hold for 1. Out for 1. Hold for 1. And the resumed deep and easy breathing. Maybe you want to breathe in through your mouth and out through your nose. Maybe you want to try just breathing through your nose for a minute with deep breaths. Just feel your lungs expanding, your body relaxing a little bit, and then your lungs deflating as you push the air out. So that is our box breathing exercise, and I hope you were noticing how your body felt. Like, for instance, now I honestly feel like a little bit lightheaded from going through that exercise, but my body feels more relaxed and my lungs feel fuller. So thinking about how we feel and what made us feel that way. So in this case, bringing in oxygen, feeling our muscles expand, feeling our muscles contract, all of these feelings are part of what's going on in our body. So the next quick exercise that we want to do is just our stretching routine. So I'm just going to stand up. Hold on 1 second. All right, so we're just going to do what we usually do stretching wise, and just the same recommendation this time is just be focusing a little bit more on what it means for your body. Be focusing a little bit more on how you feel when you're breathing, a little bit more on your muscles. So thinking about how you feel, and again, keeping track of your thoughts or noticing your thoughts as they pass through while we're going through these gestures. So remember, first we're going to go all the way up, and then you're going to go all the way down. And then you're going to slowly, slowly, slowly rise. Feel your spine straightening. Take a deep exhale while you come up until you feel your spine totally aligned. Pull your shoulders back. Do a few shoulder rotations. First back, and then forward. Feels good. Back, and then forward. Feel your muscles. Feel what's tense. Feel whether you're feeling relaxed today or a little bit anxious. Feel where you might be carrying your stress. Bring your arm over, your left arm to your right side. Turn in the direction of your stretch so you can feel your spine extend a little bit. You can feel your shoulder blade open up by pulling your arm toward your chest. And then we're going to switch the other direction. We're going to do the same thing. Feel your spine, feel your shoulder blades, feel all your muscles. And then again, to the extent that you can and you're comfortable, bring your right leg up, pull it back against your butt as tight as you can to feel your thigh, or your calf, your thigh, stretch, to feel your balance, feel whether it's difficult or easy for you to balance. If again you can't balance, that is totally fine. I could not stand on one foot before I started leading these little warm-up activities. So don't worry about it, but if you do feel off balance or if you can't do it, notice it. Feel what you feel in your body. And then your other foot, so now I just switched to my left foot. I'm holding that against my left butt, and we're feeling your calf stretch. And then you're going to release, and we're going to go up one more time, all the way up. And then we're going to drop. Feel the burn in your knees, in your hamstrings. Bring down to your toes to the extent that it's comfortable. And then slowly rise. Again, feel your spine. And just because it feels good, we're going to do one more back and forth with the shoulders. And then, to the extent that it's comfortable, we're going to lightly, lightly roll the neck. All right, so those are our intro activities. So what I want you to do now, and this is just a small transitional activity, is to just sit down real quickly, take out your notebook or type on your computer, and just take a few seconds and reflect on what feelings you felt and what thoughts crossed your mind, whether you would consider something a thought, an emotion, or a body feeling. And I want you to maybe make that little list of categories. Is this something I thought, something I felt emotionally, or something I felt physically? So take maybe 1 minute and make a list of the things that you felt. And I want you to be thinking about, what was I thinking? What was I thinking about things? Where was my attention focused? What did I feel? And just list out that sort of experience. Because what we're going to be talking about today is where our knowledge and where our experience comes from. So, what we want to be thinking about as this introduction sort of moves into our lecture is all of the different ways we feel when we do things that are, for instance, physical in nature, like breathing or stretching. How maybe our feelings in those moments are not consolidated to what we think coherently, how we might be attending to things that exist in our body, exist in our emotions, that we don't necessarily even have words for unless we're pressed to put words to them. So I just want you to take maybe, again, 1 minute and just sketch out, what did you feel? Was it a thought, an emotion, or a body feeling? And just take a minute to ruminate on that, or to consider that. And we're going to pick up in just a second with our discussion first of Austin's How to Do Things with Words. All right, so let's start talking about Austin's How to Do Things with Words. As I said in the beginning of our lecture and when we were working through our warm-up, our focus today is considering the ways in which it is possible to move beyond language, or it may be possible to move beyond what we think about as being just communicative language and express things or perform things that we couldn't access if we were just trying to say statements of fact or descriptive statements. And this is something that both Austin and Porter, who is one of the founding members of Interplay, which is a social justice oriented nonprofit group that works on using performance to educate people and to change their lives. So there are two different sorts of perspectives that we're going to get in this discussion today. Austin's perspective is admittedly very philosophical. It was written a while back, and so it has some old-timey kinds of phrasings and language in it that make it a little bit difficult to digest, but this is an incredibly important piece of work because it sets the stage in many ways and influences a whole wide variety of people to think about how language is effective beyond simply what it represents or what it says. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in just a second. Then, on the other hand, we have Porter's article, which is an applied sort of perspective on how we should think about knowing and experiencing things through the body, but also through our emotions or through what he calls spirit or a heart. And all of these sorts of experiences, he says, are substantive, can lead us to learn, can expose us to things, can make things happen in the world, and are valuable for that reason. So that is going to be our main discussion today, is the way in which performance visualizes itself as an attempt to move beyond the restrictions of language, or to use language in ways that are out of the ordinary, but might be more powerful because of that. So that is going to be the crux of our discussion, or the main part of our discussion over the course of the day. But to understand why this matters to performance, why performance is concerned with the limits of language, but also concerned with using language in ways that exceed or challenge how we usually think about language, those sorts of projects that performance studies in a lot of circumstances engages with, in order to understand them, we have to have a perspective of where this intervention is coming from, why it's necessary to think about the common sense view of the relationship between us, the world, and language as problematic. So, or as a problem. So where we want to start then is with this idea of signification. Signification, or in other words, the process of communicating through signs. So any act of communication, whether it's through written language, video, writing, music, any of those things are what we would call signifiers or signs. That is, they are symbols that we use to communicate or express ourselves. So that is how we usually think about language, is we usually think about language as a set of symbols that we use as a vehicle or a means for communicating with other people. And the received view, or the traditional way that we think about language, is that it represents reality. It represents reality. So this is what Austin is going to call descriptive or constative language. Descriptive or constative language, that is language that says it is representing a world outside of it. So if I say, my hair is brown, or my hair is reddish brown, if I use that, that is a descriptive or constative use of language, because I am saying a sentence, and I'm saying that sentence in order to describe something that exists in the world. So if I said there were 17 books on my bookshelf, that would be a representative or a constative or descriptive sentence, and you would judge whether that sentence were true or false by counting the books on my bookshelf, just as you would judge the truth of whether my hair is brown or reddish brown by looking at my hair. In any of those circumstances, what we're saying that we're doing with language is representing reality. And this was the basic way that we would look at language for a really, really long time, basically until the interventions of structuralism and post-structuralism, Austin being one of the early thinkers in sort of complicating our linguistic understanding of language and opening space for challenging the idea that all language does is represent the world. That all language does is represent the world. Now, we're not going to get into what structuralism and post-structuralism is today in too much detail, but I do want to very quickly go over one of its most basic propositions, because this is really important to us, and I'm just going to draw a little diagram that I'm going to hold up to the screen to illustrate what we're talking about. So, in linguistics, or in structuralist linguistics in particular, but again, don't worry about that. When we think about language, what we usually talk about is a sign. A sign. And so a sign is a word that is either uttered, so Austin will call them utterances, or it is written, so like the word cat. So we have a sign. And then the sign is made up of two parts. It is made up of a signifier, and it is made up of a signified. A signifier and a signified. And this, again, is a system that was innovated by somebody named Ferdinand de Saussure, who is the father of linguistics. So we have, or the father of structuralist linguistics. So we have this idea that we have a sign, over here, sign, that is made up of a signifier and a signified. So a signifier is the vehicle that we use to communicate. So in the circumstance where you had a cat, the sign, the signifier would be the word cat, or the utterance or phrase cat when it comes out of your mouth, the written word or the utterance. That would be your signifier. The signified is the mental image that comes into your head when you use the word cat. So when I say cat, the signified is whatever mental image or concept or meaning comes into your head from my use of that word. So we have this idea then that when I say the word cat, you will visualize something like a little furry animal, that beautiful illustration of a little furry animal. So the cat represents this image or concept of in your head of a four-legged feline creature. So Austin wants to start us off with this idea then, that when we say sentences, they are meant to represent things in the world. That if I use a sentence that contains a series of signs or signifiers, that those signifiers are true, that that sentence is true, insofar as they reflect an actual thing or actual state of affairs in the world. So in terms of the longer trajectory of philosophy, Austin is going to talk about Kant here, who is an early Enlightenment philosopher, but he's also arguing with people we call logical positivists, being the people who come out of the scientific tradition and try to apply science to linguistics, which is to say, try to say that what we say to be true can only be true if it is empirically verifiable in the way that scientific claims are. That is, they have evidence that proves them true in the world. So people who have this point of view then will say that there are truth makers in the world that make things true. So if I say George W. Bush is the 43rd president, the thing that makes that true of the United States, so the thing that makes that true in the world is George W. Bush's having served as the president of the United States in the 43rd, or as the 43rd president of the United States. So there is a thing in the world that makes it true, being a situation that George W. Bush occupied. The problem is, for Austin, that not all language actually works that way, and that by pretending that language works that way, we bankrupt or undermine our understanding of what language actually accomplishes. Because what Austin wants to say here is that language does not just reflect reality. Language actually does things or accomplishes things in the world. It does things or accomplishes things in the world. Okay, so that is going to be his basic argument, is language does things. And he's going to introduce a class of language, or a class of verbal utterances, or written utterances, that do this performance of reality, that are, in his words, performatives. And that is one of the main contributions that Austin is going to make to the study of performance studies, is introducing this phrase or this concept of the performative. But to understand that then, let's break things down just a little bit more before we get into the nitty-gritty of the performative. So Austin starts us off then by saying that not all sentences are statements, and he gives us examples of questions or exclamations. So if I say ouch, for instance, after I stub my toe, I am not representing something in the world. I am using a word as an emotional expression of my feelings. In another circumstance, if I say, how are you? These are two really basic examples when what is happening, Austin says, is not a representation. There's no truth. I'm not making a statement when I say, how are you? There's no statement, or there's no truth maker. There's nothing in the world that could validate that claim. The claim doesn't ask to be validated. It performs a sort of social function in getting you to speak with me. So it's not representing the world, would be Austin's argument. And similarly, saying ouch or swearing when something happens, that doesn't represent the world, he says. That is a reaction through the world, to the world, that you use language to express, So he wants to say then that this problem, the problem in this position that says, A, all language is representative, or all language is descriptive, and therefore B, for language to be true or to be meaningful, it has to have truth makers, or things in the world that make it true. The problem with both of those claims is that language oftentimes is not trying to describe the world, Austin says, and in those circumstances, language can't be called true or false, that those criteria don't apply to language at all. So, for instance, he says, we can write a grammatically coherent sentence that is functionally meaningless. Again, that doesn't tell us or communicate anything. So, for instance, if I say, Glass Knowles tacks feverishly, all of that is grammatically correct. I have an adjective modifying a noun, which is doing a verb, and there is an adverb modifying that verb. So in all of those, in its grammatical composition, in its the way that I have arranged the words, it is a correct sentence. It would not be underlined on your spell check, but it doesn't communicate anything, or at least whatever it does communicate is not captured at the level of meaning. Perhaps it is an evocative string of sentences in some ways, like sometimes poetry, as we'll talk about a little bit later, is about the feeling or texture of language and not about what it represents. So Gertrude Stein, for instance, is a famous person who, she's a famous modernist writer, whose whole thing was breaking down language in a way that only used it for its sonic, or like its aesthetic, the way that it sounds, as opposed to the meaning that it produces. So for instance, she has a famous poem where she talks about having a piece of coffee. What is a piece of coffee? No one knows what a piece of coffee is. Nobody knows what it means for a knoll to be glass, or for a knoll to tax something. These things don't mean anything, but yet they do communicate something to us. We still find meaning, or they strike us in particular ways. So we have this idea then that one of the issues is that we are capable of writing or communicating sentences that actually don't have a descriptive or constitutive meaning, or constitutive rather meaning. That is, questions, exclamations, things that are grammatically incorrect. Further, this is a there's a next step to the way that this is problematic, which is that many philosophers have used this as grounds to say that a lot of what we say about the world is functionally nonsense, that it's more of a description of our feelings or perceptions of the world than things that are actually true in the world. So if, for instance, I say revenge is moral, or civil disobedience is moral, or if I say revenge is immoral and civil disobedience is immoral, if I take any of those positions, I am making what we would call a statement of value. I'm saying this thing is bad or this thing is good. But there is no morality in the world that we could go and find and then say, I have discovered this truth maker that makes my sentence, revenge is moral, true in the world, because morality isn't a thing that has an empirical existence. It is a construct that we negotiate through our social and cultural interactions. So I can't go find morality. If I say, I am happy, I am expressing a feeling, but there's no way you can go find happiness and then assess whether that adjective actually applies to me or not. So these are issues then with the idea that all language creates truth claims, or that meaningful language has to express truth or descriptions about the world. Because when I assess something as moral or immoral, or when I say that, it is meaningful to you. It does have meaning, but the philosophers that Austin is arguing against would say, no, it doesn't, that there is no meaning because you can't find the thing that stabilizes that meaning in the world. Austin is going to say that that is fundamentally irrelevant, essentially. We do have descriptive language that is judged as true or false based on what it says in the world. The problem is that we assess all language as constative when all language is not meant to be constative. Calling something moral may be an analytic description of how you think something offends certain rules or certain norms or maxims, but at the same time, it is a statement that is intended as a judgment. That is you say that is immoral as an attempt to stop it or to express your dissatisfaction with it. And those things are just as important to the way that you use language than what they actually describe or their truth in the world or anything that makes them true in the world. So, Austin's general argument, then, just to clarify a little bit everything that we've said so far, is that up until the point of his writing, he has argued, we have not seriously considered the fact that words and language do more than simply reflect or represent or describe the reality of the world. That what they actually do in many circumstances is create reality, is perform, or make actions happen. Or make actions happen. So the problem he is saying is that we treat all language as if it is constative or descriptive, but really a lot of language is what he calls performative, which is that it acts, it does something. So in the section then entitled The Performative, or where he introduces the performative, he defines it in this way. And this is, again, really important. It's really important to think about what performances are and what they do. So he says that performatives are grammatical utterances that appear descriptive, but actually perform an action. He says that they do not describe or report or constatate anything at all. Instead, they are, and which is to say they are not true or false. They are not true or false. Instead, uttering the sentence is or is part of the doing of an action. So he's saying then that we do not use performatives, that performances do not describe the world or report anything or constate or describe, again, or represent anything. And for that reason, they can't be judged as being true or false. Instead, uttering the sentence is part of doing an action. So he gives a few examples here. He says, for instance, when a priest or an officiant or what have you marries two people, he will say, I now pronounce you married. Or he'll say, I now pronounce you husband and wife, or husband and husband, or wife and wife, or two people in love, or whatever you have the person say at your particular wedding service. But they must pronounce you married, or a courthouse must instead, in order order for that to actually be legally official. So the idea then is that when the officiant at a wedding says, "I now pronounce you married," he is not describing something. He is not reporting something. He is actually making that thing, or she or they are actually making that thing happen. They're actually making that thing happen. Now, again, I mentioned this stuff about the courthouse and stuff. Since Austen's writing, I think that you might need to do more things, and maybe this pronouncement isn't even necessary. But at the time of his writing, this is how you would be officially married, or it would be a necessary part of you becoming officially married. The second example he gives is the christening of a ship. That Austen gives us a christening of a ship. And this is something that also seems like a little bit of a dated example, but I'm pretty sure people still christen ships. And that's when you break the bottle over a ship, usually, and say, "I now call you the Queen Elizabeth III," or "I now call you the Titanic." When we do this, we give the ship a name. We're not describing or reporting the ship. "I just got a new puppy." We were like, "Your name is June." When I say "your name is June," I'm not describing something we have found to be true about the dog. I am making something true about the dog. Her name is now June. And once I have said, "I christen you June," in this case, we of course did not break a bottle over our dog, she becomes that thing. Another example is the idea of betting. So if I say, "I bet you $5 that school will not return physically, but all classes will be online next semester." If I say, "I bet you this," I am not reporting something or describing something I believe to be true. Instead, what I am saying is, "I have committed into this covenant or into this contract with you, where if this thing comes to pass, I will give you $5. So my act of betting has accomplished an action by making an interpersonal contract between the two of us happen. Similarly, if I say, "I will my son," or "I will my daughter," or "I will my partner X thing when I go," that act, especially when it is recorded in writing in a will, and then notarized, becomes something official. And the idea here is that many of these things are not sufficient on your own. So if we're talking and I say, "I will my bicycle" to you, you don't get my bicycle unless I actually have communicated that to somebody who can legally make that happen. But I have to, in my will, write down, "I will," or "I bequeath my bicycle." So the sentence is an important part of, or a necessary part of performance. So a performative then is something that accomplishes an action or helps accomplish an action through the way in which we say it. Or rather, it is a statement that accomplishes an action by virtue of being said or uttered. So he says that performatives can be either contractual or declaratory. They can either be contractual or declaratory. And what that means is that in one circumstance, a performative enters you into a contract with another person, or with the state, or with the law, or with God, or whomever. So when I say, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," to two people, that is a contractual performative because it has entered them into a contract. Or when I say, "I pronounce you person in person," "I pronounce you married," you have entered into a contract in which your relationship is legal under the state now. And therefore you have to oftentimes be formally divorced in order to end that relationship. Similarly, if I say, "I bet," I have entered into a contract with you, like in the example that we just gave about opening school. If school does not open, I owe you that money. Or if school does open, however we did the bet. I owe you that money. So I've entered into what we would call a contract. A contract. Declarative performatives, on the other hand, so we have contractual performances which enter you into some kind of bond or contract with another person. A declarative performative is more one-sided. So when I say, "I christen the ship," that is a declarative performative because the ship can't say, "No, I do not want to be called Queen Elizabeth III." When my dog could not say, "No, I hate the name June. We're not going to go with that," right? So it is a one-directional sort of thing. I am declaring something to be be so, but in making that declaration, it is so. So if, as a nation, I declare war on you, you don't have to be like, ah, yeah, okay, we're going to war now. I've made that declaration, so we are at war, and you can't do anything about it. In both of these circumstances, what we've done is declare something to be the case through language, and then it becomes the case. It becomes the case because we said it. Because we said it. So in either case, then, a performative does something. It enters us into a contract or changes the state of affairs because we have declared it to be so. Because we have declared it to be so. So this is the first main observation then that Austin wants to make, is that there is a thing called a performative, that our uses of language oftentimes enact things, and we need to be able to discern when we're trying to evaluate or make sense of a performative act of language that accomplishes something, or when we're trying to make sense of, instead, a declarative act, or rather, I'm sorry, not a declarative act, that is a type of performative, when we're trying to make sense of a constative, a descriptive, or a representative, all of those mean the same thing, sentence that can be evaluated as being true or false. That we need to evaluate these things by different standards. And that is the main thing that Austin wants to say in the second lecture and ending the first lecture, is that if it is true that we assess representative or descriptive language based on whether it is true or false, based on whether it lines up in the world, then we need to have a different way of analyzing or studying language that performs things or attempts to perform things rather than describing them. So, he says, when things go wrong with performatives, as they will, we should call them infelicities instead of saying they are true or false, because there is no truth or falsity to what we perform to what we do. All there is our adherence to, or whether the performance actually materializes as we said it would or thought it would. So the idea of an infelicity, it literally translates to unhappiness, and he says that there are certain requirements for felicitous or happy performatives. And things get a little abstract and difficult here, especially in the second lecture when he's going into a lot of detail about this stuff. I'm not really hung up on you knowing the differences between all of the felicitous and unfelicitous performances. The main idea here is that we have to come to understand that performances are not simply true or false. They do things, they accomplish things, they construct the reality in which we live, and therefore we have to judge them by other standards than truth or falsity. And he's saying that the way that we should judge them instead is by this idea of happiness or unhappiness. And what he means by that is that there has to be, or is that the performative actually has to come into effect, that it has to actually do the thing that it set out to accomplish, as we already said. So he says that there must exist an accepted conventional procedure having a certain conventional effect for any performative to operate. And this is, again, really important for us because this is where the idea of performatives being scripted, even though they accomplish action, comes in. So when we get married, that only works as it does because of the cultural system that makes that act meaningful. Similarly, when I christen a ship, a bet is only meaningful to the degree that it is culturally and structurally enforceable, that it actually happens the way that we say it is going to happen. So the first requirement then for a felicitous or a happy performative is that a structure has to exist in which that performance is made meaningful. A structure has to exist in which that performance is made meaningful. If I attempt to get married by the same procedure in a culture that follows a different procedure, my marriage will not be legally binding or actually come to effect. If I attempt to christen a ship in a place where ships do not have names, no one is going to call that ship by its name. The conventions have to exist in order for the performative to be enacted. And we want to think about that as we move on through the rest of the semester. Because, so Austin is giving us a very specific idea of performatives as something that accomplish action. But when we talk about Judith Butler, for instance, performance and when we talk about race a little bit later in the week, we'll talk about how through our performance of social scripts and the codes that power sets in place, we construct things. We make things happen like race and gender, and we make them happen how they do. So we want to really consider then, what are the scripts that are in place that allow us to perform in certain ways? How and what kinds of action do they authorize? And what kinds of action do they mean that, do they constrict or mean that we can't take? So I, for instance, my performative, if I wanted to marry somebody who shared my sexual, or who shared my gender, if I wanted to marry somebody who shared my gender, in 2008, I would have been unable to because gay marriage was illegal at that time. So the cultural requirements for that performative to operate in a same-gender marriage or in a same-sex marriage would not be there, and so the performance wouldn't happen. It would be an infelicitous performance. So there has to be cultural conventions that exist that allow the performance to happen, and those cultural conventions also restrict what types of performances can happen. And that is going to be really, really important for us to think about both how we think about the possibilities of performing. So you have to perform in a way, for instance, that is intelligible or fits scripts that your audience would understand, even if it breaks or riffs on or is ironic about those use of scripts. We're always talking to our history. We're always talking to scripts that give what we say meaning, and we have to think about the politics and limitations of that. So that is the first and major thing about, I think, thinking about infelicitous or felicitous performances, is this idea that even though performances are not descriptive, performatives rather, are not descriptive, they don't describe things in the world, they still have a relationship to language that comes before them and to social conventions that establishes what that language means and what that language can do. Performance is 100% about testing those boundaries, seeing what else language can do, seeing how we can make language exceed our cultural scripts, but it is always in dialogue with what came before it. The rest of what he wants to say about performances being felicitous or happy is that the procedure must be executed correctly, and people also have to follow up on what they say they are going to perform. So if I say, yes, we are married now, I have to actually want to get married to you. If I say, yes, I bet you that $5, I have to have the intention of giving that $5 to you. If I choose not to do that, if I break our oath, the performance is, again, unhappy, but it's unhappy for a different reason. It's unhappy because I have abused it or been insincere. So if you look down onto the next page of our lecture notes, you'll see the graph that I posted from Austin's text that charts out the various kinds of ways a performance can be infelicitous. And he divides this into, or unhappy again, into misfires and abuses. That is, times in which the act could not be accomplished. The act could not be accomplished, either because we did the act wrong, misexecution, or because the act was not allowed by our culture, a misinvocation. So we might misapply something, our execution of the performative might be flawed, we might face logistical difficulties, all of these things might make the performance not materialize. Our wedding officiant was not a real wedding officiant. You never really loved me and then fled the wedding. I had my fingers crossed behind my back. All of these things are misfires that might void the actual process. An abuse is when everything logistically and culturally and conventionally is there, but I'm simply being insincere or lying to you about what is occurring in that circumstance. And then my performance still accomplishes something. It probably breaks your heart or makes you feel stiffed out of $5, but again, it is an abuse of the performance. It is not felicitous because it did not perform the action I designated or said that it would perform. So, the idea here then is that Austin is encouraging us to, and this is to summarize the whole piece in many ways, Austin's encouraging us to think about this word performative, or the idea that there are linguistic acts, things that we say, that accomplish things, and that we need to be judging these things according to different standards than truth or falsity. We should judge these things essentially in terms of their ethics and their functionality. Do they accomplish what they meant to accomplish? And are they being accomplished justly, or are they being abused? And that's how we should think about the performative. So this already then shifts us. It's no longer, are you representing something truthfully? Are you representing the world in a way that checks out? That's how we evaluate science. That's how we evaluate other kinds of writing or other like history. That is not, Austin says, how we evaluate performatives. How we evaluate performances is by asking what they do, and then essentially asking about the politics or ethics of what they are doing and how they are doing it. Asking whether we have accomplished our actions in the way that we ought to, whether the resources were available for us to do this, and also whether we have abused the system that allows us to act through language, that we have manipulated that system in order to achieve our own ends. So for instance, a final example of what an implicitist performative might be would be if I were to say, I love you to someone, and in doing that, I was attempting to get them to enter into a relationship with me of some kind. But then my declaration of love was in fact insincere. I never had that intention or the commitment or intended to fulfill the commitments that saying I love you usually entails. I never had that intention. My act of saying I love you might still perform something. It still does something, but I'm abusing that performative act because I'm saying this usually would get a person to trust me and to want to spend time with me. And so I am using this gesture in order to accomplish an end, even though I have no intention of reciprocating or of following up with or following up on the commitments that come from my profession of love. So that is the idea, again, what an unhappy performative would be. Implicitist performatives are when we can't do the action, either because the cultural conventions or the necessary parties or some logistics are not there, or is when we abuse the performative by using it in ways that are not in keeping with its purposes. So we're going to stop there, and then we're going to transition to talking about Porter's article on interplay and the wisdom of the body, because that is another perspective on how we might think about moving beyond language, or moving beyond this idea that language is simply about representing the world or the truth of reality. So to stage a little bit of a preliminary comparison by way of concluding really quickly, the Austin article is not really about moving beyond language itself. The Austin article is about saying language isn't just about meaning or representation. Language is about what it does in the world, what it accomplishes. The Porter article is going to say that we need to think about what exists beyond language entirely, what we access through performance or through interaction, what we feel and what we know that we might not be able to generate knowledge about otherwise, or might not be able to consider, to understand otherwise. So that is where we're going to pick up next time, or not next time, sorry, in the next lecture. Please watch the next lecture, where we talk about Porter's essay on the wisdom of the body.